This little guy is an acorn weevil, and as soon as I saw that little face, that long face, I knew I needed to make a low poly model about this little guy. So today I thought I'd talk you through the modeling process and share everything I know about the wonderful acorn weevil. Getting started, you can see I just have a cube that I'm scaling out just a little bit along the y-axis in order to get a longer shape for the body, and then I have to adjust my camera all the time. I always start way too zoomed in. I don't know why I don't just zoom out from the beginning, but anyway, you can see I've added some loop cuts to this cube just to start scaling a little bit here and there just to get kind of the general silhouette of the body and the head of our friend acorn weevil here. And of course, I've added some UV spheres with a mirror modifier for the eyes. Let me tell y'all, I have comment sections full of people begging me to optimize the eyes so that they are actually low poly, but I won't do it. I love UV sphere Beanie Baby eyes too much. What can I say? Okay, so you can see I've really scaled in this leftmost area of the actual model. I've scaled that in a lot and just started extruding it for the snoot here, probably, of course, the most distinctive feature of our friend acorn weevil, and all weevils. I think there's 97,000 species of them, and most of them have this elongated nose. It's actually called a rostrum, which is very exciting for me because my favorite creature ever, the sawfish, also has a very long nose-like appendage called a rostrum, and I just think that that's nice that they both have that. Okay, so you can see, to get started with the legs, I was gonna say I added a cube, but then it disappeared. Now I'm scaling in this bottommost face, right under the head, really. I originally wanted the legs to ideally be just part of the main mesh of the body. That's what I normally do, but bugs are really challenging to me. I don't model bugs very often. I mostly model sea creatures, quadrupeds here and there, mostly sea creatures right now. But I don't model a lot of bugs, so these legs were especially challenging for me. And eventually what I ended up doing was I just added another cube again with a mirror modifier, and I ended up making the legs full of different segments, but we'll get to that. As you can see right now, I'm just making them part of the body, and honestly, like, topology-wise, this is a mess, but, you know, just for the sake of representing the shape of the legs, I don't think it's the end of the world or anything. I think it's okay. You can see I even get his little claw right there. I think that's that little toe-looking thing on the end of the foot. I think that's called a tarsal claw, I hope I'm remembering that correctly. I learned a lot about bug anatomy while I worked on this model. Okay, so you can see I made a couple little adjustments to different groups of vertices on the different parts of the legs just to get them sort of bent in the right direction. And now I'm just going to duplicate these legs. If I feel myself getting stuck on part of a model, this is my go-to. It's almost always the legs that trip me up, and if I just get stuck on a model, if I get stuck on a step of a model like I did here, just find a way to move on. You can come back to it anytime, and when you give yourself some space away from the model, the solution to the problem you couldn't figure out is almost always more clear when you actually give it a little bit of time and a little bit of space. So I just duplicated those front legs a couple times, rotated them around, scaled them in, just to make some little placeholder legs for now. Making some more adjustments to the rostrum here. The acorn weevil actually gets its name from, they use their rostrum to bore tiny little holes into acorns. If you've ever found an acorn, or really any tree nut with a tiny little hole in it, there's a really good chance that an acorn weevil bored that hole into the nut, and the females actually do that in order to lay their eggs inside the acorn, and then the baby weevil, or the grub, will feed on the inside of the acorn until the acorn drops in the fall, and then the grub lives underground for 1 to 2 years and emerges as a fully fledged acorn weevil to repeat the whole process. It's great. Just doing a little bit more shaping of the head. I end up, later in this time lapse, I end up actually doing basically like a retopology of the whole head called their head capsule, which I think is adorable. I ended up really redoing the whole head from scratch because I think for an animal like this, where obviously the rostrum, their little head, their big ol' eyes, they're so distinctive, and making sure that all of those shapes are right and in proportion to each other, I think is the most important part of making this model really look like a Weevil. And of course we want our Weevil to be as Weevil as he possibly can be, so it was time well spent. Okay, and you can see what I'm doing right now is I'm adding a couple loop cuts here and there. I'm moving some of the vertices on the very top of the model up just to kind of give the impression of separate body parts. I think I went ahead at this point and I did separate the actual head capsule from the rest of the body, but for the rest of it, I didn't want to necessarily have to separate all the different part of the Weevil's body. I didn't want to have to make a separate mesh for the thorax, for the abdomen, for the wings and everything. But instead I just kind of played around with different loop cuts and I made a little indentation you can see that kind of gives the impression of that actual separation between the thorax and the abdomen without having to add extra geometry. We love an optical illusion. And now I've added another cube to my scene here. This is just to add the little antennae that you can see in the reference photos. They're about halfway down the rostrum. They're super cute, they're super tiny. It looks like some species of Weevil, they do have antennae like closer to the base of the rostrum, so like right on their face kind of. And even some of the photos that I found of acorn Weevils, I think at least one of the reference photos I have, their antennae are seemingly attached to their face instead of kind of growing off the rostrum like I'm modeling here. I don't know what that's about. It could be a difference between male and female Weevils. I don't know. Quick detour here. I had a lot of trouble understanding how the legs actually attach to the body for my Weevil, so I went to Sketchfab to look at how other 3D artists do it. I found this really cool flower Weevil model by the artist Boycraft, who I'll link below. Just have to take a second to admire this animation. I really love this guy. Okay, so I paused the animation, and then if you go into the inspector on Sketchfab, you can actually turn on the wireframe view, which is really helpful if you're trying to look at other models of the same animal you're trying to create and trying to understand how the topology of something like a leg or a paw works. And right here, it's super helpful because I can see that this artist is using separate pieces for the femur, tibia, and tarsus or foot. And I can also see this little indentation kind of here, this little outcropping that comes out from the body. This is the coxa, which attaches the leg to the body of an insect. And then I had to just go look at their profile, and I had to show you all this butterfly model because it's mesmerizing. I don't know, it's just so beautiful. I wanted to show y'all. Okay, back to work though. So now that I've gone through Sketchfab and I have a clearer idea of how my legs should be able to attach to the body of my model, I'm just going back and I'm making some adjustments here, kind of cleaning up the topology that I had adjusted earlier on, and now I can extrude out this little rectangular area so I can have this little outcropping where this front leg that I scoop forward a little bit will attach right to the body. And now actually I've also added another cube to my model here, and this is going to be the first segment of the new leg that I'm gonna make. I'm just gonna remodel the legs from scratch, especially since I'm gonna make them all from separate pieces now. It just makes more sense to start over again. So this is the femur, super simple. I just wanted it to be as long as it should be and make sure that it slopes down a little bit where it connects to the tibia, which is kind of like the shin of a bug's leg. And that too, I add another little loop cut there just so I can kind of make a little bit of a slope where bugs don't have knees per se, but it's like a knee if we're comparing it to our own leg. And now you can see I'm just kind of adjusting the shape a little bit before I add another cube, and this will be the tarsus or the foot of our Weevil. And they have such cute little feet. They're just adorable. So I have to make sure that I get this right. The disembodied legs look so silly, especially just straight out. They just look like he's about to sit down on a chair or something. Okay, so you can see here I'm just adding them right back pretty much where the original legs were, just making a few adjustments. You have to be careful Normally, I try to make models all be one continuous mesh because I usually add an outline to my model, and when you're using outlines on 3D models, a lot of the time it can get kind of messy if you have a lot of different shapes intersecting with each other like I do here, so you just have to be aware of that. And like the add-on that I use for my outlines called Outline Helper by Feline Entity, super wonderful. That add-on will actually let you control vertex groups for different parts of your outline, so you can make it thicker or thinner in different places. And so I make sure that I do that a lot whenever I have lots of intersecting meshes that all have an outline on their mesh. I want to make sure that the areas where the meshes intersect with each other, I want to make sure that they're not getting really messy and just really busy visually, so I make sure that the outlines are much thinner, so they're not accidentally clipping out of the other meshes. For this middle pair of legs, you can see I've just duplicated the first pair of legs that I made, and I'm just making some little adjustments here and there, using circle select to grab groups of vertices and kind of just figure out where they need to go. I made lots and lots of adjustments to the slope of of all of these legs throughout the whole process. I was very, I don't know, it needed to be perfect. And it doesn't. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be perfect. But in my mind, in this moment, the slope of the Weevil's leg had to be perfect. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth about that. Yeah, and you can see I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to connect the end of the femur that goes up into the body. That was a big challenge, especially for this third pair of legs, the hindmost legs here. That was the biggest challenge. I think part of it was like, I think I made the body of the Weevil, I think I made it maybe a little bit rounder than it needed to be, and that really caused a challenge. Like you can see very clearly in the viewport right now, the legs are just mostly inside the body, and we don't want the body clipping out through the legs like that, especially when you have these outlines, because with the outlines, if part of the outline is gone, then it makes it look like, because there's no shading, it makes it look like the leg morphs into the side of the body kind of, and that's not how anything works. So I had to make sure I did lots of adjusting, and it turned out fine. I think I had to add a little bit of extra geometry. Oh, no, I didn't. You can, yeah, you can see it's just sticking right out from the side of the body, those hind legs. That's okay, though. Okay, and right here, I am just doing basically a retopology. I've just added a cylinder to my scene with 8 faces, kind of chopped it in half, and then extruded it out and scaled it in to make just this kind of dome shape, and added some UV sphere eyes, and once again extruded the rostrum, or the snoot, right out along the y-axis. And I just did this because I said earlier, like, with an animal like a weevil, where it has such distinctive features, that little face, the eyes, the nose, the little circular shape of the head, it's all so distinctive, so I really wanted to make sure that I got that looking the way it should. We want our weevil to be so weevil, there's no question about it. There could be no possible question. Okay, and you can see I'm just kind of scaling the head down now that I've modeled it separately. I'm just scaling it down just to make it sure that it actually fits into the body. And then I can just go ahead and separate my original eyes and my original head mesh and get rid of that. I put it in my backups folder just in case I decide I need it later. And just moving a couple little vertices around here and there along their normals, just sliding one vertice at a time just to make sure that those UV sphere eyes, since they're so perfectly spherical, on a low poly, when they're attached to a low poly surface, you'll really see lots of little edges on those UV sphere eyes where they connect to a low poly surface. So I just wanted to make sure that I moved some of the vertices of the head around just to make sure that we didn't get tons and tons of lumps and bumps in the eyes where they connect to the actual head capsule. Back to the legs a little bit. I'm just making some minor adjustments here that aren't crucial, but I could see that one of the problems I had with the legs was that they were way too thick early on. They needed to be way thinner, at least, especially on the tibia. Like the femurs, you can see in the references, are pretty chunky, but the tibias are really, really thin. They just look like little sticks, kind of. So I had to make sure to scale those in a lot. And I wanted to curve the tibia outward a little bit, and now I'm just extruding out the tarsal claw on the end of the foot. Again, those little details are so distinctive. Definitely want to make sure that I don't forget about them. And now that I've made all those little adjustments to the size of the tibia, to the curve shape, the tarsal claw, everything, now that I've made all those changes, I'm just going to duplicate those front legs again and just reattach them to the body, deleting the old legs as I go along. Oh my god, such a difference in the legs. And it's crazy because this model, so I think the total time I spent modeling and rigging and animating this model for a very simple little idle animation, I think it was about 3 hours. And the funny thing is, I could have never, ever sat down and just modeled this Weevil for 3 hours straight, first of all. Absolutely not. I could have never just sat down and made this model from start to finish, probably, because I just find that so much more challenging. I mean, I do it every now and then for my once a month live streams for Sneepstorp Club, but usually that's just not how I work on models, because I think having time away from the model where you're just not thinking about it at all, I feel like that away time just solves so many of the problems that I have. Like, so many problems I encounter, I would not be able to just immediately look at the model and know, oh, I just need to do X, Y, or Z, unless I've spent like 12 hours or 24 hours, just not thinking about the model and not looking at it. But yeah, this model, I think it took like 3 hours or something. I didn't do it all at once. I think I made this model as like my daily warm-up practice, my daily art warm-up this week. So I only worked on it about an hour a day, and on day 2 and 3, I always found whenever I sat down to work, I was kind of shocked by how immediately clear it was. Like, oh, the legs are way too thick. Oh, the head shape is completely wrong. Oh, things like that. It's always funny how that works. Okay, so now I'm doing some UV unwrapping here. I knew that the UV unwrapping was going to be really simple because really, I mean, you can see in the references, like, they don't have a ton of like distinct markings per se. They're pretty much a solid color. I'm adjusting the color a little bit here because I started UV unwrapping and I knew that I was going to want to texture paint maybe some little squiggles, a very, simple pattern for the shell that goes over their wings. I knew I wanted to texture paint a little bit, and if I want to texture paint, I have to make sure that I get this base color to be where I want it before I start texture painting, because if I start texture painting and then I realize that the base color is wrong, it's a whole mess, and there's lots of redoing, so I always want to make sure that I get the base color right first. Yeah, so I knew that I only wanted detail really painted onto the shell over the wings, and everything else was probably just going to be a solid color, just a very brown, earthy palette for our friend Acorn Weevil here. You can see I'm just going through each segment of the leg, one leg at a time, and just changing the different colors. In retrospect, this definitely would have been faster if I just UV unwrapped it. It definitely would have been faster, but in my mind at the moment, this was definitely the most logical solution to how I wanted to do this. Coloring his little tarsus and the tarsal claws here. Weevils actually have much more complicated feet shapes than this, but of course, low poly, I don't want to get too crazy. I don't want to get too photorealistic here for my Weevil model. But yeah, their little Weevil feet are really interesting. They look like, I don't know, they almost look serrated. I'm gonna see if I can find a photo that I can show on screen here so you can see what I'm talking about, but they're very interesting little guys. I just love them. If you've ever seen, I don't remember if I said this earlier or not, but if you've ever seen an acorn on the ground with a little, tiny little hole in it, which I remember seeing all the time, you have probably been in the presence of a weevil. Perhaps that's what they do. I don't know why I felt like I needed to say I don't know why I felt like I needed to say that just now. But it is the truth. I originally thought when I started this model, I was just looking for any old weevil to model. I didn't know very much about them before starting this process. Other than that, they're extremely silly, so I had to model one. Originally, I was like, oh, it's called an acorn weevil. That's probably because it looks like an acorn. But no, I mean, they're brown. They're round, I guess. But I don't think they really look like acorns. But that's what I thought they were named after for a little bit. Okay, so now you can see I'm starting to do some texture painting here. Again, just super simple. I knew I wanted just a little bit of detail on the shell here, and that little line that I've painted on toward the front of the shell, just to kind of emphasize that sort of separation between the thorax and the abdomen. Just painting over it a little bit more to make it a little bit thicker, a little bit darker, so it's a little bit more noticeable, and then just a line right down the back of the shell, and that's just to kind of paint the idea of wings onto our model. I knew I didn't want to model separate wings and stuff, so I figured I would just do it this way. Now I'm also just painting the kind of the darker color that I have for the underside of the body. I'm just painting that up in the image editor that you can see on the top right there. Normally I like to paint directly onto the model, but for something like that where I just wanted to paint right along the edge of two colors, it's much easier and faster to paint it right on the image editor instead of the model. So just some minor changes there. I made the rostrum a little bit darker. A lot of the acorn weevils that I see in the reference photos, they kind of have like the colors were really tricky for this model. The rostrum, a lot of the time it is this kind of a deep, like reddish brown color, which the rostrum on the one that I modeled here, it kind of has the red-brown color. Not quite, but it all worked out. I like this color palette a lot, so it's fine. And then we have his two little mouth parts at the end of the rostrum. We have to add those. We, of course, want to make sure that our weevil can successfully bore into acorns when time comes for that. And now just a little bit of housekeeping here. I just selected all my meshes and decided to join them with Ctrl-J, mostly just to clean up my hierarchy on the right there. And a couple small adjustments. I selected the eyes, the head capsule, and the antennae there, and I just wanted to angle them up a little bit more and move it farther backwards into the body. The little head capsule, it looks so like snuggled into their body, so I wanted to make sure that I definitely had that effect too. And also, this was all because I saw this really cute photo of a weevil on Reddit, and he was, okay, I had to make him dance for a second. I saw this really cute photo of a weevil on Reddit in the middle of this process where it was just looking up and was just standing so tall on its legs. It was just, it was so cute. It was a revelation. I'll see if I can find it and put it on the screen right here, but I definitely wanted my weevil to look like that one. So I made his legs a bit longer. I sloped the femur downwards some more, so you get that kind of impression of him pushing himself up to look at the camera. And some more final adjustments for the hind legs here. And last but not least, I didn't screen record all of the rigging and animating process for the idle animation. I thought it would be boring to watch. Let me know if you want me to screen record that in the future, but I did just add one little bone right there to control his head and his eyes and the antennae, just so he can kind of move his little head around the way that weevils actually do. And here we have the final weevil! I made him a quick little idle animation, nothing too fancy. I originally decided to make this model as a way to practicing modeling insects more because I'm working on a moth VTuber model right now. If I finish the VTuber soon-ish, that'll be the next video. As always, thank you to the members of Sneepsnort Club you see over on the right there. We're slowly approaching 400 members, which is crazy, but especially so because Sneepsnort Club is coming up on its first ever birthday in about a month, and my goal for the entire first year was 100 members, so very cool. Anyway, thanks for watching, bye!